All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, Autism Connects. I am so excited to be here with you, whether it's your morning, your evening, or somewhere in between. Um, Hopefully, you can join and hop on live. But if you are catching the replay, we welcome you here. So my name is Kelli Fetter, and I might be a familiar face as we have connected once before with Autism Connects, but I want to share a little bit about myself and my organization so that you can get to know me a little bit better and understand what we do and why we're here and why I'm so excited to share this information with Autism Connects. So I am the founder of Handwriting Solutions, and what that is a virtual company that provides tutoring services and intervention for students with handwriting, but also with reading and spelling and written expression too. And I'll share a little bit about why it encompasses all of that as well, kind of more towards the end, though. I really want to make sure that we have time to cover everything that I want to talk about today, which is all about handwriting and autism, empowering strategies that work. So obviously you're probably here because maybe you have a child or a family member on the spectrum, or maybe you work with students on the spectrum and you want to learn how you can support their written expression, their written output. You want to understand why that's even important, maybe. And also just better equip yourself as well as your child or your student to serve them with this life skill. So keep the questions coming. I love an interactive session. So if you have questions, pop them in the comment section, the chat section, whatever works best for you. And I will try to save time at the end to answer those live. And if for some reason I don't get to all of them, I will come on and just comment via text. So I will make sure that I answer everyone's questions today. Okay, so let's get started. So, I think the first thing that and I'm not going to have slides today. I want this to be very informal as well. So, if you are a visual learner, I suggest that maybe you put on subtitles so you can read along. Also, I highly recommend that you grab a notepad and a pen or a pencil and take notes. That is the best form of learning to process what you're taking in. So jot those notes down. It doesn't have to be legible handwriting. It doesn't have to be anything. As long as you can look back at those notes and remember, that's going to stimulate your brain to learn and retain as much as you can from today. I want to set the groundwork though for what we're going to be talking about, because with autism spectrum disorders, the key word there is spectrum. And so the strategies I share today, I'm going to try to share a wide variety so that if your child with autism is at a different level than another child, that is 100% okay. And I want you to be able to meet them where they are at that level. We want to have that just right challenge for any student, whether they are autistic or not, because that is best practice. That is going to help them achieve the next goal and the next outcome. So I just want you to remember that there are going to be strategies that you can absolutely take away today that fit your child's level. And then there are going to be strategies that might be above or below their level, and that's 100% fine. We are going to meet them where they are. The other thing I want to make sure that I touch on is that we at Handwriting Solutions value a neurodiversity affirming approach. And so if that's a new or unfamiliar concept or term for you, essentially we are honoring where that child is at this time. And so what made me want to remember to bring this up today was actually last week I started as a kind of a prep or a kickstart to this talk. I shared in our blog, in our newsletter, and on social media some little hints of tips and strategies for autism and handwriting. And I had a parent, I believe a parent, I'm not really sure, suggest, or I guess allude to, um, that this is not appropriate for their child because their child refuses and hates writing, right? And, that's where I want to make sure that I say, then that's not where we start. We don't start at pencil to paper. If your student is throwing that pencil across the room and ripping up the paper, they're not ready for that. So I'm going to give you tons and tons and tons of pre-writing strategies to get them to that point, because that's what's going to make the difference for them. But why? Why do we even need to care or worry about handwriting with our autistic students? There's a few main reasons why. Obviously, I'm very passionate about this. Number one, the brain science. It's just very clear, the neuroscience, that when we write by hand, our retention and our learning is improved versus if we don't write at all, or if we type keyboard versus write. Now, again, there are times when those skills are appropriate, accommodations and such, but the brain science is just super clear that that neural connection from hand to brain is powerful. Also, these students are spending, I believe the statistic is two-thirds of their day is spent in fine motor tasks and in writing. Now, if you have a student who's struggling with fine motor tasks and writing, and over half of their day is spent in that task, and we don't prioritize that task for them, that's going to be a really rough day. And you're going to see behaviors, and you're going to see meltdowns, and you're going to see dysregulation, all from their skills are not where they are expected to be or need to be for that. And so again, we're going to back up, we're going to meet them where they are, and then we're going to prepare them. And then finally, when we think of handwriting, as adults, you probably grab your pen, jot down a note, and move along your day. But we need to know that handwriting and the skill of handwriting is very complex. And it's also not just an academic skill, it is a life skill. So it's not that we encourage all students to be able to write, whether they are on the spectrum or not. This is a life skill that we want them to have not only in their academic journey, but also when they are out of academics. It's a life skill that they're going to have. So if we can equip them with that, whatever way possible, that's going to be great. So let's dive in then. Let's talk specifics of why handwriting might be tricky for the autistic child. Because I also will be the first to say this is not an easy skill. Again, I alluded to it is a complex skill, and I could spend this entire session discussing that complexity. I mean, if you do want to go learn more about that, just go to our website, handwritingsolutions.org, or our social media, which I'll share at the end, to learn a bit more about why is handwriting so complex? How is it complex? What brain systems and body systems and sensory systems do we use? Because we do deep dives there all the time. But for handwriting, and specifically autistic students, handwriting can be challenging because, number one, the motor planning and the coordination. Handwriting takes a lot of motor planning and coordination. And oftentimes our autistic students might struggle with sequential movement. So being able to sequence and coordinate their arm, their hand, their fingers for that smooth movement that you need for quality handwriting, that might be tricky. Being able to control those movements. I think of the easiest way to think about this is, if you have a top line and a bottom line, that takes a lot of pencil control to hit the top and the bottom. And if you're an individual who might struggle with motor planning and coordination and kind of overshooting and undershooting targets, that's going to be really tricky. And then just overall coordination of their body, their dexterity, for holding the pencil, right? So you'll sometimes see those quirky little pencil grasps because they're just accommodating for that, that coordination and that dexterity for the pencil. So motor planning coordination, that can be tricky for our autistic students. Fine motor weakness is another area that they might have challenges in. Again, I will say that this is not every student with autism. This is very, very subjective. So I'm being very broad about this. If this does not apply to your student, that's okay. You could just set that over on the shelf. But a lot of autistic students struggle with fine motor weakness. And so that means weak hands, maybe even weak shoulders, weak fingers. And so that impacts writing because if they don't have that stability in their shoulders and in their hands, it's really hard to achieve this mobility. I think about this as kind of if you ever sit on like one of those high top bar stools and there's no back on it and maybe there's no little foot ledge, right? And so what does your posture do? You immediately slump forward. Your feet start swinging and dangling because there's no like support for your body. So we start at the core, we get them in a really nice positioning for the core. We build up our core strength so that we can set up nice and upright as well. And then we have that stability. And then we start working on that stability of the hand too, building out those little tiny muscles. So there's so many little tiny muscles in your hand and then in your fingers to get that stability so that we can get the mobility that we need in our hand and our fingers. Another reason that handwriting might be tricky for children with autism are the sensory processing differences that they might experience. So at times and what we've seen just anecdotally is some sensitivity to paper texture. I know that for some that might feel like really paper, but paper texture, I don't know about you, but if I am feeling maybe just like a regular piece of notebook paper and then like construction paper, you know, that kind of rough, grittier paper. And then maybe my fingernail might brush on that construction paper, you know, it's not as bad as nails on chalkboard, but it definitely gives me chills, right? So if I am a neurotypical person and I can obviously sense the differences in paper types, our students who are more sensory avoidant can really feel the difference in the different paper types. Also, that pencil to paper contact. We've had some students, I'm thinking about one of our students who she had to make sure that she wore a long sleeve so her hand did not rub against the paper because that caused an aversion for her. Or that sound, the auditory sense of the pencil to the paper. Also, this would be great for chalk to chalkboard. Some students love it. And some students are like complete avoidance. Like you can just see their full body. Like, we're not going to do that, right? If they are avoidant. So we are going to find different ways. And I'm going to talk about strategies in a minute, but I just want to set the stage for that. So the pencil to paper contact or whatever writing tool to whatever physical output that they are providing. And then of course, there's a myriad of other visual, tactile, auditory inputs that are happening when we write as well that could cause trouble for our autistic learners. And then finally, handwriting might be difficult for autistic learners because the executive function challenges. Handwriting, again, is so complex, and there's the physical part of handwriting, the physicality part of it, but there's also that piece of handwriting that has to recall, how do I form the letters? Where do I start the letters? Oh yeah, don't forget about line placement and sizing and spacing. Oh, and you have to remember what you want to write about, not just how you want to write, but what you want to write. How do I form a sentence again? Don't forget capitalizations and punctuations. I have this really amazing story in my brain and I can give you all of these verbal details and then I go to write, and the executive function part of having to organize our thoughts, of having to plan our writing, and that task initiation part too, because it's so much more fun to tell you what I want to write about instead of actually writing. You can see there's so much going on in the brain. And so sometimes for our autistic learners, that is tricky. Those executive function skills impact them. So then let's talk about strategies that work. Again, I'm trying to be all encompassing with the strategies that I give today, but pull what you need, try them out, meet your child at the level that they are. I never want you to take a strategy and it feel here and your child is here, and then we need to start here. So number one, and I believe if you go back on Autism Connects, or probably on our social media as well, you can find my talk, I believe it was in May, this past May, about foundational skill building. So number one strategy that I would say that is maybe forgotten at times, perhaps, and or we sometimes get stuck in this strategy too, which I'll explain a little bit why I think that. But we want to focus on foundational skills. So again, if we're having trouble with this movement of holding our pencil and manipulating it, and yet we can't really, we're struggling with even maintaining our positioning in a chair or in any other adaptive seating options, meaning we might have a super weak core, weak shoulders, etc. It's going to be really, really hard to expect a student to hold a pencil and manipulate that pencil at a relatively fair, amount of legibility. And so I want you to think about, yes, while we're doing this handwriting instruction and this remediation and intervention and all of this, how can we also be working on those foundational skills? So strengthening. I think this is one of those things that if we implement some sort of strengthening program with all of our kids with autism, obviously there's going to be tons of sensory benefits, but there's going to be tons of benefits strengthening their core, strengthening their arms and their hands so that they can participate in these life skills like handwriting. And so this can also be super fun, right? Again, if they are craving sensory input, this could be just a super easy part of your day. Building in animal walks, climbing. I love, love, love climbing. The monkey bars where they have to hold their weight against gravity and they're holding it with their hands. That's great for strengthening those hands. And then it can be something as simple as playing with putty or Play-Doh to strengthen some of our hand muscles. Strengthening is going to make a big difference. If we can come from a place of that stability, then we can achieve a little bit better mobility. And then also on foundational skills that we need to ensure are taking place. Again, I don't care if your child is 5 or if they're 15, we might need to start at foundational skills here. Building their pre-writing skills. So pre-writing skills means when we work with students and they're just starting with us, let's say, we're not going to start with a capital A because it's the first letter in the alphabet. Why? Because that capital A has 2 diagonals. Diagonals are one of the last developmental strokes that we learn as we are developing. So typical development of line stroke and pencil stroke development. When you think about, maybe a neurotypical toddler, you get crayons and they scribble and they've got the fisted grasp and that's great. That's wonderful. I love it. And then they start learning how to do the vertical stroke. So from top down, and then they learn how to do a horizontal line, and it's so fun. There's so many fun games that we can play, little choo-choo trains to get them to imitate you. And then they start getting the curves. So maybe they start figuring out, ooh, I can make this line connect into a circle. And then they can make little snakes across the page. So they're figuring out that curved line. And then finally, they get that diagonal. And most of the time that diagonal doesn't come till around age 5.5, sometimes even later. And that's for our neurotypical population. So again, if we're wanting to build the skills of our autistic students, we've got to think developmentally. Do they have these pre-writing strokes before we get to actual letter writing, and particularly lowercase letter writing, because that is significantly more challenging than capital letters. Okay, so we're starting with our foundational approaches. Now we're going to implement multisensory approaches. If you are even familiar or follow us along on social media, you know that we are huge proponents of both of these approaches. Foundational approaches, we have to explicitly teach kids how to write, how to form letters, but we can do that in a multisensory way. And our students with autism love a multisensory approach. It is engaging. Actually, I lie. Every student loves a multisensory approach. It is engaging. It is fun. It stimulates the brain and the body like nothing else. And so what does that look like? That can look like a lot of different things. And what I want you to think about is how can you do that in a way that honors your own student's sensory profile. So think about their sensory preferences, what they like, what lights them up. And then think about how you can adapt their environment to offer more of that, particular during a high cognitive load task like handwriting. So maybe we change up the paper type. Maybe we don't use paper at all. Maybe we use dry erase boards. Maybe we use chalkboards and chalk. Maybe we use textured paper, put a piece of sandpaper underneath a piece of regular paper, or like I mentioned earlier, construction paper. That gives them a little bit of friction, a little bit of resistance, which sometimes our kids with autism really like. It feels good to them, and then they're more likely to engage in the activity. Think about trialing different writing utensils. They don't always have to use a pencil and a piece of paper. They can, again, you can try different pencil grips. You can try different pencils altogether, maybe a weighted pencil or a weighted pen. The erasable pens are all the rage now, and I absolutely love them. I think it's Friction is the brand, Frixion. Yeah. Love them, like all the kiddos. And it's fun because then they can still have the ability to erase, but pens sometimes can be great for our sensory avoiders because they're more smooth than the pencil. They don't have that friction that you get with a pencil. And so those more sensory sensitive learners might prefer a pen or a marker, dry erase marker board. Of course, this is where you just have to know your child and maybe even do a lot of trial and error, because I know that some of our learners love the dry erase board, and some of them, the sound of that marker squeak on that board makes them want to run out of the room. And I think, sometimes it's like, I wish there was just one solution, but I think that's the beauty of autism, is that, again, it is a spectrum, and the trial and error is part of kind of the fun of it, and really, again, honors that individual student. So I'm here for it. I love it. Another multisensory approach that you can take is just changing up the position of their writing. So what that means is if sitting at a table in a chair is too hard for them, that's okay. They don't have to. Maybe they want to put a piece of paper, tape it to the wall, and stand at the wall, or kneel at the wall and write, or maybe lie on their tummies if they're really needing some input, lying on their tummies with the paper on the floor, and then they write on the floor. Great. Using a huge piece of paper and have them on their hands and knees writing these huge letters, or go outside and do some sidewalk chalk on the road. It is changing that position is a way to bridge the gap. If they're not ready for pencil to paper, you can still work on handwriting. And so that's just a great way to bridge the gap. Two more things with multisensory that I want to make sure that we hit on as well as we keep in mind the time is built-in movement breaks. Built-in, maybe your child's not a movement person, but they just need breaks. Built-in breaks, let them show you what they need for that break. It helps modulate and regulate their systems so that they are in a state of learning. Handwriting, while we can make it fun and sensory rich and pull in a variety of senses, our child also just needs to be in a regulated state to learn too. And so let's pull those breaks in as needed so that they can get to that state without hitting that threshold and that, fight or flight. And then finally on the multisensory, just think about how you can bring those sensory rich experiences in. So I know you've probably heard this 100 times, but I do think that there's still such value in bringing in the sand trays, the shave cream trays, any sort of sensory rich where they can write the letter in that modality. And you can even have them use a paintbrush or something they can also be practicing their grasp too with that modality to help provide that sensory rich environment. If that is too much for their senses, air writing is also great. Let's just, especially if you have a classroom, if you're an educator and you have a classroom of students, having everybody just write the giant letters in the air, then they're getting that big body movement, and that will help translate that to those smaller movements that might be more challenging for the learner. Okay, a couple more thoughts and then we're going to wrap up and do some Q&A. So the piece that I could not leave out in this talk about handwriting and autism is the visual supports. So oftentimes autistic learners thrive with visual supports. And so I want to leverage that. I want to use that to our advantage and provide them those visual supports. I think that only makes sense. So some examples of that could be, again, let's look at their paper type. Maybe let's highlight. I love highlighted. I prefer highlighted over like the dotted line or dotted letters, the tracing, the typical tracing. I would rather them have like highlighted lines because sometimes the dotted tracing letters gets confusing for a child with autism. So I love highlighted lines, highlighted letters, visual models of the letters. And I really like, and there's this evidence too, Dr. Berninger, and I think many other researchers have talked about this method of that visual model of the letters and having that start point and then arrows to show what line comes next. So like this would be the first stroke. It would start here and then it goes down. That can be great for our visual learners. Trying different types of paper. I've mentioned that before, but think about this from a visual perspective of, are the 2 lines enough for them? Do they need 3 lines? So the 2 lines with the dashed line in the middle. Do they need raised lines? I love the notebook paper that have the just slightly raised line for our sensory seekers that gives them that, that sensory input and lets them know, oh, I've got to stop the letter here, this is the top kind of thing. So those are great. And then if your learner is at the ability to start to self-check, that is a great tool. There's little visual self-check tools that you can get to have them start self-editing, or just using like a little handwriting checklist if they're at that level and they're ready for that. So overall, when we talk about these approaches and these strategies that you can implement, I think I want you to keep in mind, keep it fun and keep it functional. So incorporate their interest. There is no reason why we can't write about dinosaurs or write about trains or draw a picture and then maybe just write a couple of letters if that's where they're at. incorporating that student's interest is going to get you so much further than just picking a random subject. It's going to get you the buy-in, it's going to get you motivation, and it's going to honor them in that neurodiversity affirming way. Take small steps. You don't have to think, oh my gosh, we're so behind in handwriting and now we're going to have to write sentences today. Just start small, take very small steps, celebrate each progress, each win, each level, because you're building. This is not a race and this is not it's not a sprint. We're building these skills. It is a journey. It is a marathon for some students, but every little step we get gets them closer. And then focus on functional writing. So obviously we're going to be building up their skills in a developmental way, but if your autistic student is at a level where it is just extremely hard for them, then let's think functional. What are they going to need? They're going to need to be able to write their name. They're going to need to be able to sign their name, to have functional writing. They can fill out forms at the doctor's office or for a job or whatever. So think about that too. Make sure you're bringing in that function. And then I would be remiss without talking about some accommodations, because at Handwriting Solutions, we are firm believers in remediation. And I do believe that every student can have some ability to be able to write with the right approach and the right remediation when they're ready. That's important, when they're ready. And they're not always ready for us. And we will tell parents, your child is not ready for us. Try this, this, and this first. But I also am a big believer that in the school system, or in certain scenarios, that we need to bridge the gap while we are building on those remediation, building up those foundational skills, doing that explicit, solid, systematic instruction, that we need to bridge the gap. So we can pull in low tech and high tech accommodations for our learners, adapting their environment. Again, we talked about pencil and paper environments, positioning environments. You can also bring in some high tech approaches. Trying speech to text with them. Obviously, there's keyboarding, but there's word prediction software, there's digital note taking, there's SnapType or other platforms where you take a picture of the worksheet and then they can type in their answer rather than handwrite it. And so there are tons. All you have to do is a Google search or put it in your favorite AI tool for all of the high-tech accommodations, and they're wonderful, and they are really helping bridge the gap in this accessibility. The biggest thing I will say with all of that is that it still needs to be individualized to the child. And so when we have a student that's struggling with writing by hand, we cannot just say, well, give them a computer, we're going to be doing keyboarding now. That may not be appropriate for the child. If they're struggling with writing by hand, keyboarding may be just as hard, and often is. So making sure that those accommodations fit the child's strengths and fit the child's areas of need. Same thing with any other high tech too. So that would be my suggestion there. So best practice then, to kind of wrap this up, what is best practice? We've talked a lot of strategies today, hopefully not super overwhelming, but I really wanted to make sure I got you all this information. So best, easiest strategies: short, consistent handwriting practice. Once you kind of get your rhythm and your routine, 5 minutes a day, maybe even 1 minute a day. When you're starting out, it literally might be 1 minute a day. And I don't want it to be one torturous minute where we're like, hurry, we gotta do this. No, it's still very much interest-based, neurodiversity affirming, but it's also meeting your student where they are and getting that consistency. The consistency is going to make a lot of difference. Merging the multisensory and the interest-based, that is going to be best practice for your child with autism. Building those foundational skills, collaboration with the entire team. So I'm talking parent, student, teachers, administrators, therapists, tutors. If we can get everybody kind of on board and say, hey, this is working for this child. We love collaborating with schools, collaborating with parents, getting everybody kind of on the same team with that too. Um, on the note of best practice, I will make sure that we include a link in the event or in the chat or somewhere that we do have a list. So if you want more multisensory ideas, click on the link that I will share, and it will give you a ton of multisensory strategies for working on handwriting. So definitely check that out. And then I think to wrap it up, when do you know when to seek out handwriting support? So the evidence is very clear that if your autistic student is struggling with pre-writing skills, that is when you seek out support. Now, I don't want you to panic and say, oh my gosh, but my kid's, 13 and it's fine. It's also never too late. But if you're here and you do have a younger learner, early intervention is best practice. And so if we can get in there early and help that child, that's going to make a huge difference. If you are wondering if your child does need extra handwriting support, I will also provide a link for a completely free screener that we have on our website. And basically, it's just a fun little quiz that you can take and say, yes, my child does this. No, they don't do that. Da, 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 da. And then it's going to give you the results and say, it's also going to give you, depending on your result, it's going to say what our recommendations would be and some things that you can do at home and try at home. If your child is already receiving OT, because I know occupational therapy is widely utilized for our autistic spectrum, and rightly so. I'm an occupational therapist myself, so I'm a huge believer in OT. It still may not be enough. It still may not be enough to make a difference in their handwriting. So I will be the first to say, outpatient OTs, school-based OTs, they're often focusing on motor skills, they're focusing on sensory processing, they're focusing on regulation, and often they do not have the time or the bandwidth to focus on remediation of handwriting. And that's where we come in. We help bridge that gap, get that explicit systematic instruction in a very science-backed way and approach. But I think it's really important that we know that. So I want you to leave here with the takeaway of it is possible for your autistic student to be able to not only learn how to write, but also to learn how to achieve legible writing. We are not looking for perfection. We want our child to be functional and legible writers because it is a form of communication and to demonstrate their learning. A couple of, I guess, stories that I want to share. I'll keep these very brief. One of our autistic students that we've worked with, we worked with him on and off for actually a couple of years, just they took longer breaks, so that's not the norm. Normally we work with students for anywhere from 4 months to about a year, depending on their needs, but this student was with us a little bit longer. They took off summers, they took off longer holiday breaks, but when he first started with us, he was unable to write any lowercase letters. I would say 75% of his capital letters were illegible. Definitely minimal formation, accuracy, minimal line accuracy, kind of all over the place. And in general, I would say just very not functional, not legible. He is writing today, and we've not worked with him in a year and a half, probably, maybe, yeah, about a year and a half. So we still hear from his parent, hear from his teachers, what did you all do? Because he has the best handwriting in his classroom, and he he loves to write logos. And so this is where we go with interest-based. So he can write any logo like the Disney logo, or like a restaurant logo, or like the McDonald's logo beautifully. It's like artistic. And so he's brought this artistic piece, this love for drawing and creating art, into his handwriting world. And it's really, really cool, particularly to see where he was, and how that impacted his academics versus where he is now, and that he's able to use this as a communication tool and, again, as a life skill. Another student that I was thinking of when I was preparing for this was, um, again, it's proof of finding what interests that student. And so they're into writing scripts for TV shows. And so that's what we did. Was we wrote scripts. And that's what's motivation. We hear it from teachers all the time, that the difference that the student is experiencing in the classroom by taking off that cognitive load of how to write has led them to more creativity and freedom to experience what to write. And that's ultimately our goal. So again, if you have a student, if you have a child and you want to learn more, and you want to know what your next step is, I am also going to include a link for a free consultation. I would love to meet with you and chat with you, and if anything, share with you what the next steps would be. And like I said initially, I am never going to say, yep, you're in if your child's not ready. I will say, focus on this area, or build these skills first, and then when they're ready, they can come to us. So I'll make sure that all of those links, I know I shared several links here, so I'll make sure that they are all in the Facebook Live page, any comments or whatever. But I think we are ready if we have time for Q&A. Hopefully I didn't go over too long. If there are no live questions, perfectly fine, then we will wrap up, and I will be sure to follow along on the comments on the Facebook event. And thank you all again. If you are attending live, thank you for joining us. If you are catching the replay, thank you. Share it with your teachers, share it with your family members. I want to get this information out there. So again, thank you all so much. It was a pleasure to share this information with you today.